There's a few different ways to find the zeros of a polynomial. Well, in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how to solve these types of problems like a pro. At the end of it, you should be feeling a lot better about how to do these types of problems than you do now. That feeling is only just a few minutes away, so be sure to stick around to the end of the video. I'll show you how to do these problems. We'll be going over an example in this video that should help you quite a bit. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. Find all the real zeros of the polynomial function, and the function that we got here is f of x equals 49 minus x squared. So really, when it comes to any of these types of problems where you're trying to find all the real zeros of the polynomial, really what that means is essentially all you're doing is you're taking the function that they give you, 49 minus x squared in this case, and setting it equal to 0. And whatever x values solve this equation, when you set it equal to 0, that would be a 0 of the function or a 0 of the equation. So this is really all you're doing with any of these finding the zeros of a polynomial. You just set the polynomial equal to 0 and solve for x. That's really all it is. So there's a couple different approaches you could take. In general, if you ever have a quadratic or any polynomial equal to 0, the best approach is to try and factor it. Now, you may not necessarily always be able to factor any quadratic or any polynomial, but if you can, that's probably going to be your best bet. So let's talk about how to factor this one specifically. It's a little bit weird because we don't have an x term, right? We just have an x squared term and a constant term. So it doesn't exactly look like a lot of quadratics. But what we have here, which is kind of nice, is when you don't have that x term, what you can look for sometimes is to see if you can apply difference of squares, which in this case we can. So difference of squares basically just says if you have one term that is a square minus another term that is a square, you can factor that out into the first term plus the square root of the first term plus the square root of the second term times the square root of the first term minus the square root of the second term. So in this case, in order to apply this difference of squares formula, all we want to do is think of 49 minus x squared as 7 squared minus x squared equals 0. Because now we have two square things being minus from each other, one minus the other one. So we can directly apply this difference of squares formula and just take the square root of the first term. The square root of 7 squared is 7. So 7 plus the square root of the second term. The square root of x squared is just x. And then 7 minus x equals 0. And the reason why you want to try and factor a polynomial when you're looking for zeros is because when you have the product of multiple things and you know that product has to equal 0, well, that's going to happen whenever any one of these factors equals 0, right? If this term is 0 and this term is not, you still end up with 0 times some other number. Similarly, if this second term is 0 and the first one is not, you still end up with some number times 0. And anything times 0 is 0. So as long as either one of these terms is 0, the whole equation as a whole would be 0. So really what that allows you to do is kind of split this into two separate equations that are easier to solve and kind of create a list of different x values that solve any one of the multiple equations. And that gives you all the x values that would cause this whole thing to be 0. So basically we can say 7 plus x equals 0, solve that equation, and then 7 minus x equals 0 and solve that equation. Solving this one, we would just subtract 7 from both sides, giving us x equals negative 7. For this one, we can just add x to both sides, giving us 7 equals x. So if x equals positive 7 or x equals negative 7, the equation as a whole, the original equation, is going to equal 0, meaning x equals 7 and x equals negative 7 are the zeros of this original function that we had. Well, hopefully you found that video helpful and you're feeling a bit better about this topic, but trust me, you don't want to stop here. There's more that you want to know about how to deal with polynomials and quadratic equations. Go click that video right there and I'm going to show you how to take a quadratic equation and find all the important details about that function using the actual equation of the function.